Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game designers and our players engage in conversation. That's a clarification from last week. We're no longer only core developers, being more inclusive now. Our byline has been revised. So this week we want to talk about healers, but before that, we'll just kind of warm everything up, talking about our weeks, what we're playing, etc. Chris, what's been going on for you? I saw you gaming on Naraka Blade Point again last week.
Yeah, I was playing some Naraka Blade Point. It's kind of like a third-person action-based PvP game that's like Battle Royale, but yeah, I guess it actually is sort of a Battle Royale game, but it has really great movement in the game, sort of like everybody's like Sekiro, so you grapple hook around, and it's pretty fun. There's some good stuff there. Yeah, a bunch of my guild people I play with have been playing it too. So
cool.
Played a bit of that, and then I was actually playing some Smash Brothers, trying some of the different new characters. It's been a while. So they added like a lot of them since then. I haven't played since they added Banjo.
Dude, I don't think. Yeah. I think last time I played was like when they added the DQ Warrior around then. So probably about the same time. It's been a minute.
Because they just announced the Tekken character, right? I think it was Tekken, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that game will never get old. I was just thinking about updating my Switch today because I was just rejiggering a bunch of networky stuff. And like, man, the promise, it sucks. I just feel like when I was young, all I wanted was to be able to play like the best ultimate version of Smash Brothers with my friends all day, every day. And now that I could effectively do that with online multiplayer, I'm old and I don't.
Yeah, I know, right? And you just get kind of worse and worse. Your reaction time kind of gets worse as you get older. Like spoilers for any youngins in the chat, but
it did not work out that way. But that's dope.
But
what a game.
Yeah. Who do you guys main? Who do you main, by the way, Luca and Smash, when you play?
So when I was playing, most recently I was Mega Man. I just really...
Oh, that's a good one.
He's dope. I actually, did my best to learn some tech and stuff with him too. It was the most try-hard I've really ever gotten about a Smash game. But before him, I'm kind of basic. I was just Link forever, like since N64 and onwards. And it's Link, the way Link plays changes, it feels like dramatically every single Smash Brother. So it doesn't really get boring to keep maining him because they keep shifting the power balance of like, how you're supposed to work with him around and around. I like people that you can be harassing with from range and kind of whittling the entire time, and then you just close up and just chunk them down,
Yeah.
I like big, bold moves. I like to play Kirby. I like to play
my favorite.
Bayonetta.
Oh my god, I forgot about this. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Chris is Kirby maining.
Bayonetta is good. Yeah.
Kirby's fun too. I mean, you get a little flavor of everybody, right? But
no. Cute. You get like sorry.
And he is adorable. That's true. Are we sure?
No.
Do they gender
did
Kirby?
You?
Wait, I didn't even know Kirby's. Yeah, that's good.
Did you even mean to make that joke? You said get the flavor. You know what I'm saying?
Nice.
He eats. Okay, sorry.
I didn't, but I'm gonna edit this episode so it sounds like I did now. So we'll just all laugh on cue, coming directly out of that with some air horn noises. It'll be good. Candace, I saw that you're finally through 2020, just in time for July 2021. How's that going?
I just couldn't believe it. Like a Facebook memory popped up and it was like, remember this thing that you did? And I was like, yeah, that was earlier this year. And I was like, oh my God, it was exactly a year ago. And 2 jobs ago. It blew my mind. Yeah, I'm finishing up It Takes Two. I finally found somebody to play it with me, Rip Forever Alone. And then
nice. I want to hear what you think about. Wait, how far did you get?
I am no spoilers. I'm pretty sure I'm on the last mission to collect 4 of something.
Okay. Did you have the one where you have to like pull that stuffed animal guy?
Yes. Oh my heart. that wasn't even worse than that. God, spoilers, everybody. Like earmuffs if you don't want spoilers. But like the first boss I think you fight is it's like a robot, but it has eyeballs, and at the end you like. It's so graphic. You like suck it's a vacuum. That's right. And you suck the eyeballs out of it. It's so gross. It's like very dark game. I did not expect it to be so dark. I was like, this is going to be a Pixar looking game. And it's like the themes are really heavy. You're like trying to kill things and I don't know. It's wild.
So that's my question for you. What do you think the target audience for that game is? Like who they, because there's a lot of things I'm like, I don't think this is like for kids necessarily, you know?
Oh, no, it's definitely not for kids. The theme is divorce. Um, your goal is to try to make your child cry, and the way that you do that is you destroy her favorite stuffed animal, like spoilers. Um, there's a lot of like really violent things that you do along the way, and that's what Chris is referring to, not even just the sucking the eyeballs out of the monster. And actually the boss fights are hard, not gonna lie. Like
Yeah, the boss fight. I wanted to ask you about that too. Like, what do you think about the bot? The designs are not too bad. I mean, it's a little basic, but they're pretty polished, I felt like.
the game is very, very cute, and the whole time your face hurts because you're smiling, but it's wholesome in a way that only adults can reflect on it and say that is wholesome. It's not like heartwarming and fun time like for kids. It's you definitely need the perspective. It's not like Shrek where the kids are gonna laugh because something slapstick happened, but the parents are gonna laugh because they understand what the word divorce means or something, right? So but the second boss fight was like the hardest boss fight I think I've fought in a video game since Bayonetta 2 or something.
Wow.
It was pretty hard. Because like the platform keeps disappearing. It was like it was in the garage boss. It was pretty good. I was like, man, this is
Hmm, hmm.
this is like a mythic fight in WoW, basically, but you're
Yeah,
solo.
yeah,
Well, you're duo actually. And
yeah.
if they didn't allow you, so the multiplayer works like this: if one person dies, as long as the other person is still alive, you mash a button to revive yourself. You don't have to like revive each other. You revive yourself. But if you both die, yeah, if you both die at the same time, then you wipe and you start over as your last checkpoint. And so it's a really frantic boss fight where I found myself just running away so that he could resurrect because I knew I was going to die. And it's good. So no, I don't think the game is for kids. I think that it would be acceptable to play the game with a kid, but you also have to consider it's the same studio that did A Way Out, which is a very adult cooperative game as well. So I think it was like a different setting, but it was still like probably the same core audience for A Way Out. Did you find the Easter egg of the brothers, by the way?
No. You'll
Yeah,
have to tell
during
me
one of
that
the
later. I don't want to spoil that for anybody, but tell
okay.
me later. Message me. I want to hear what that is.
Yeah, so I thought the game was really, really good. We thought the game was about to be over and we're like, all right, we'll play one more session. And then I get there and like all we did was I think launch the final quest. And now it's definitely has to be over after this. So but no, we didn't get to finish it. It turns out like each of those final quests is an hour long or so, so we'll probably have another 3 hours left on the game.
What's like
I
the
really
total
did enjoy it
runtime
though.
on it?
Like,
Sorry.
I think it's like 8 hours, not
Or
12 hours or something.
yeah,
8
12
hours.
hours probably.
Okay.
I think
Yeah, yeah.
we've dumped about 8 hours into it probably by now, and I think there's still at least another 3 hours left. If the pacing is correct, it's like the very end of it is like it's like collect the four foozles. Pretend it's collect the four foozles, and the first foozle took me an hour to get. Right, so
Mhm.
Hmm.
unless
Yeah,
it's
I really want to.
asymmetrical, then it's going to be another 3 hours.
I really like this genre though. I wish there's more games like this. Because I have a friend and I just play games with her every now and then, and this type of game is like perfect for us.
Did you
To
play?
just
You should play A Way Out. Seriously, fantastic fucking game. Very adult themes. Very good.
okay. Maybe I'll try that next.
I mean,
Uh,
I
Cool.
played Brothers back when, so now my expectations are, I guess, a little more set, but I'm still trying to reconcile you calling this game wholesome at the same time as you're talking about sucking out eyeballs. Like, I can't think of a
it's
situation. Like, anytime a vacuum gets
dark.
near eyeballs, wholesome is, that's not the
I,
label I'd
I
bring
should
around.
say I should say because it's whimsical and it's like Toy Story where like there's toys
Okay.
that come to life. Seems like the setting should be wholesome and some of the levels are just as whimsical as you'd expect. There's like a bouncy house and there's underpants jokes and like there's some wholesome stuff about it. But right off the bat they hit you with a divorce. They're like the first thing is like the mom and dad are arguing and talking about how they fucking hate each other and about to divorce and it's like, well, this isn't a kid's game. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we can talk about this game.
Yeah, cool.
For
We'll do a
but
divorce game episode. And
I've done that before. Okay, moving on.
yeah.
yeah.
Last week, I reported that our YOLO attempt into the third boss of Valheim did not go as planned. We came back and we completely just mopped the floor with him. Speaking of encounter designs, it was fun as shit rolling in there, pretty prepped up, and I think losing a few times to him first really made it feel all that much better when our band of noobs took him out. It was clean choreography. You know, there was kiting him away. There was, when ads spawned, there were some trolls that got involved, and you know, it was like people taking them down while someone brought bone mass somewhere else, and we'll have to see what we go and do next. I think everybody kind of just like took a mental break after that, because the week of like prepping, we over prepped like a million fucking poison potions that we will never need now, because we only needed like one. It's like you only need to use one consumable if you don't die. Just get good. So now we're stocked on that.
That's part of that illusion, though, that fun part of the game where you don't know how hard the boss is going to be, and so you over prepare, right? It's akin to in WoW Classic when you're going to fight Lotheb for the first time, or maybe not the first time because it's hard, but like you go to do your actual like. Lotheb was a fight in WoW, notoriously where you couldn't heal. Speaking of healing, and so you wanted to make sure that you had every advantage you could possibly get, which included like turning in an Onyxia head buff and getting Trolls regen potions, which we learned didn't even work, and farming all the potions to make sure that you could absorb damage since you can't heal damage and all that stuff. So, but Valheim still had that, right? And so you feel like that you don't know how hard the boss is going to be, so you prepare, and the joy comes in the preparation and the feeling that's going to pay off, right? And that you're doing it together. And then sometimes the reality, like what happened with me with one of the next bosses, is like, womp womp. The boss just like hid in the hill, and we just fought them. Anyway.
I mean, I'll take one of those. Like I said, a glitchy win. It's still a dub. You know, mark it. So maybe we'll get that with our next adventure up into the mountains, and we'll figure it out. So yeah, game completion by 2022 is going according to plan. Slow news week. Not a lot of stuff there. Off the top of my head, I saw that somebody data mined a listing for the FF7 remake on the Epic Games Store, which is really exciting as somebody who had a PS5, then didn't have a PS5, and would really love to play that. It's like they've been rumoring making that for PC for so long, and it was, you know, approaching like Switch Pro levels of just like will they, won't they, and so hopefully this means it's actually coming to PC, because I mean, that game looks fantastic. And I feel like, can you really be a gamer who grew up in the 90s if you don't find time to play the FF7 remake at some point? Like, you have to.
Well, you do have a PS, or you did, or you
I did.
Gave it away, didn't you?
So yeah, in and out. That is there. I saw that Cyberpunk got relisted on the PlayStation Store finally, which is like, it's insane that that's only lifting now. Fully 6 months ago is when that game launched and all that shit was first going down. So I honestly think that probably speaks more to, I'm going to guess, just operational slowness in the pandemic than anything. I don't know that there's anything new to really say about that story, but I hope it runs okay so more people can get to play it, because I fucking loved that game. And I will fight anybody who wants to say otherwise. I think it just got a ton of hate due to the performance stuff. But isn't it so funny how the narrative can flip from like the fastest selling PC game of all time that's just super incredible to those developers are problematic and lazy and greedy and they lie and
yeah, I think they can bounce back though. You know, they just gotta fix some bugs, do a big update, it'll get some traction.
Wait a minute, are you talking about World of Warcraft going from the fastest selling PC? Because I feel like there's still a solid, 15 years between those two takes, right? The fastest selling PC game of all time to what's happened to you? Or do you mean that Shadowlands was also branded the fastest selling?
No, that was me subtweeting WoW, because Shadowlands was the fastest selling game, and then people started finding the flaws in that, and then the same thing happened just a few months, or just like a couple weeks later. I think Cyberpunk broke through that ceiling, like just sold ungodly amounts of copies, but the narrative immediately just became like, oh, it's broken, it's buggy, and then you had all these like art house videos of cars just glitching into the sky with screaming NPC dialogue over the top, and like they were fucking hilarious, but I don't know. The experience itself I thought was fairly solid. That's just me. I think they'll bounce back too, Chris. I think that like there aren't that many people making single player experiences of, I want to say at least that production bar. I'm not maybe going to say quality because that's maybe debatable when like polish isn't there, and I think people will come back around for that stuff.
They're also like, I mean, I remember seeing some plans they were talking about, and they were even hiring for these, which was like for multiplayer for that game. So it was kind of a world that they wanted to keep expanding and building upon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, they
So
have
here's an interesting thought experiment. If you had a 16-year-old MMO that you were in charge of, let's say like you're the big wig, you're the guy that's
this
in
is
charge of
all theoretical.
your 16-year-old MMO.
Mhm.
Well, no, I would, because I want to divorce this from World of Warcraft. I don't want to say
Sure.
what would you do to fix World of Warcraft, but I do want to say if you had a very successful product and it was an MMO and it's 16 years old and it's already expanded into every region that it's going to expand to, right? Like you can't just open up in China and get 4 million more players, and you can't open up in South America and get X amount of million more players, right? So you've already like reached your saturation point on the globe. And then you have so you're not really going to like significantly gain audience.
There's no more low-hanging
So-
fruit. But are you saying you're fully kind of tapped out audience-wise? Like you can't really expand anymore?
Right. The only expansion you're going to get is new players within the regions that you're already in.
Okay.
In that thought experiment. And then you have a player base that the most vocal people are quite upset with their game. What would you even do to try to get it back on, like, one, how would you define getting back on track? Like, what would be your parameters for like, okay, now we know that our game is doing well again by our players. Like, I don't know what the financials are of this game, so I can't say like it's doing well or not doing well. I don't give a shit. So how would you measure success in a game like that? And then also, what would you do to get that success? I'm going to pass it to Chris first.
Yeah. So how would you measure success with that? You mean measure success in terms of like turning the numbers around, like getting more players and more engagement, you mean?
The answer is whatever you think it is. So like if you consider measuring success by player count, then yes. Or if you consider measuring success by customer satisfaction, or if you consider success by number of YouTube videos that use your name with the word shitty, or like whatever algorithm this is a theoretical universe. What would you, how would you measure success? Like what are your values?
This is a personality test.
For me,
described as an essay question.
For me, it's just like measure success based on if me and the team and whatnot are happy with it, feel like it's a good game that we're making that's aligned with what the vision of the game is, what the pillars and values and principles that we've established. If we're happy with that, then I think that's somewhat successful. And then there's other vectors here too, like in terms of MAU or engagement and whatnot, growth. Like those are other ways to measure success. I just think that it's so conditional depending on the situation. It's hard to say necessarily, but I think a lot of times with games that don't grow, they usually have. I always feel like they're trying to please everybody in terms of game design or new features or adding to the game or whatnot. I just feel like you need to stick with what the original vision is, because if you have a lot of players already, if you had a lot of players in the past, it's clear that a lot of your original ideas were validated in some sense, right?
Yeah.
Which is why you always see like products and companies constantly grasping at the past, like, oh, it's to grab the nostalgia, of what you see. This like with Star Wars or any new IP that comes or IPs that's trying to reboot. They always go back to the past, to the fundamentals, right? Because that's usually what people, that was kind of the deal when they got in there in the beginning,
Yeah, I like what you said, because what I heard from you was like, one, you would measure success by like the authenticity of the product. Like, here are our pillars, and do we meet our pillars? And the assumption there is that if players were happy with the game with those pillars, and we're still achieving those pillars, then we know that we're still doing well by our players, or doing right by our players. And then second to that, you would use the numbers, the MAUs, the monthly active users, and the growth, and potentially, I'm not sure how satisfaction would be measured, but surveys, maybe retention, who knows? I like that. I like that angle of authenticity. What about you, Luca?
Well, if I'm already in every market I'm going to be in, this is not a small game if it's been running for 16 years. So this sounds like, I want to say, an image problem stemming from actual problems, but the thing to be rehabbed in this situation sounds like your reputation with the player base. Like that sounds like the thing you'd want to repair. And I know that if I were out there reading all this stuff every day and I felt like my game had really fallen from grace, even if the numbers were what they were, it would bother me a lot. And I just looking historically, the kind of games that have pulled off turnarounds of this type, they've had to regain trust, and they've done so by really just putting their heads down and doing the work for a while. And, this is kind of like what Chris was, I think making sure that everybody is still on board with the vision and understands what's being built and, getting to all those touchstones again, that's important. But I think you just have to go through a long period of, I want to say thoughtful dev and like less promises and less press. I feel like these situations where the public or influencers or something is against you, like they're kind of no-win situations, and like the harder you push back, the harder you're going to get pushed back upon. You kind of need to like fade out for a little bit and then come back hard. I'm not sure that that's like an actual marketing strategy of any sort, but sometimes when the sentiment is what it is, I just feel like literally any piece of news that comes out of the hypothetical company is just going to get immediately pounced upon and turned into clickbait. I think you just need to shut up and right the ship for a little while. And I
also think sometimes it's just like maybe it's ran its course. Maybe it's time for something new. Like.
Well, yeah, I didn't know that giving up was an option.
So you would just leave then, Chris. You'd be like, "Well, this game is now over." Bye.
Might be. Yeah, that's my
joking.
real answer.
I don't think the idea of the game is I just think it just seems like could you just use a fresh coat of paint sort of thing,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what I heard from Luca. What Luca said was like, I would repair the image of the game, I would give it a fresh coat of paint, and I'd do best by my customers.
I think I'm saying you have to repair that image by just actual development and results, though. Like I think that.
Right, not like smoke and mirrors and like extra press.
Exactly, positive outreach and everything can come naturally, like a water flowing down a mountain. When you've got a good core product there, everyone can come out. They're proud. People are responding positively to it. That's easy. But if you try to lead with that, like you're just digging yourself deeper. So I would shut up for a while and figure out what's going on.
Interesting. And that's also assuming that your 16-year-old MMO has an image problem. But I would suppose that nothing can survive in the world for 16 years without some image problem. I think if I were to solve it, before we move on to healing,
Okay.
I would focus on the player's experience and make that my first and foremost goal. Like, let's make this experience the best experience we can. And either the players will like it and we will have succeeded, and then as such, our numbers will grow, or we won't have been successful and the experience that we think is good is bad. And then at least you're like testing a theory. And I know that sounds really fundamental, but there's so much I think that gets lost in development about the experience of the player, because part of that is deeply understanding your audience, but part of that is identifying your audience. Like Chris was saying, like maybe your audience doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it's just the game is not to exist. So, and maybe that means making a hard decision about what the game is. But as long as you're putting that experience first, and it's something that, like Chris said, like the team is proud of, and it nails what you want, you get that much closer to like satisfying your audience.
Yeah, because I just think games are an art form, and you can only really. It's an expression of an idea of an experience of the creators. You can't just kind of poll your supposed community or people that you want to target and say, what do they want, and try to build that. It's just never going to work. You have to build something you want to play, something you want to create, and the audience will come or don't come, and I think that's the only way you could do it, right? And I think sometimes when you get lost is when you're just like, you lose confidence or conviction in what you're doing. And you're like, well, these people are complaining about this. Well, let's just focus on that. And then it turns into something that you don't like. And then you have a detachment from. And that, it really becomes evident.
Yeah. You're not putting that experience first.
Which is like, I think the riot value, right? Player experience first.
What?
You said the riot value?
Yeah, right.
The riot
value,
value.
yeah. Riot, yeah.
You're being tested.
I mean, Player experience is, I actually like player experience first as a value than gameplay first, because gameplay first is sort of turned into like system design first, which is not gameplay. Gameplay is actually really means player experience. It means the combination of not just system design but also great art, sound,
Yeah, that it's actually
control,
more akin.
everything.
I mean,
Yeah.
if we're gonna talk about my previous employers, then I would, or current employers, then I would say it's more akin to the Amazon's like customer obsession, right?
Hmm.
Rather than the,
Mhm.
because like gameplay first as a core value, which is like I think what Blizzard touts, maybe not, but gameplay says that the game is good, right? But the experience or the customer focus says that like all the experience of it is good, like logging into the game and feeling supported by the game and feeling heard by the game and closing the game and feeling good about closing the game. Like there's a whole thing that's not just the gameplay of it. There's like a that's like the donut. There's like a hole in the middle of the donut, I think. And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
but anyways, so you
That's
had
it.
said something that I was going to smartly segue into healing.
Oh, did we lose? Did we
Now
lose
I
a
Do it.
forgot.
segue? We can do it right now. Okay, main topic. That was a great question, by the way. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, sorry to derail.
No.
No,
We
no.
got time.
That's I could talk about that topic all day long too. So
Yeah. So healing. Any healers in chat, by the way? Does anyone here main heals all the time, not just for the sake of healing queues and like they just love doing it?
Oh, as we crack this open, if you're raising your hand or whatever, you're a healer, like, good for you. I've also been a healer for like 20 years, so
Are you a main heals? That's a
yeah, I've been
role.
main heals since the days of Ever and the Quest. But I wanted I first sort of wanted to talk about the history of healing. So, like
Please.
when we think about MMOs and we think about the Holy Trinity, right? We think about that social experience of reliance on one another as a core combat mechanic. Right? Like you need a tank to take the damage, you need a healer to heal the damage, but then you need the DPSer to make sure that the monster dies before the healer runs out of mana or the tank runs out of hit points. And there's like that sweet spot of reliance that actually, like, I argue the old days of D&D didn't really have. You spent most of your time trying not to get hit in the first place. Or can we think about the first game that had a Holy Trinity that we played? We're not gonna like talk, like, we're not gonna say that we know everything about video games and the history of video games. For me, that was EverQuest. Did anyone have a game that predated the Holy Trinity? That predated, I'm sorry, EverQuest that used the Holy Trinity?
I can't think of one.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
obviously D&D, right? That's where a lot of it comes from. But
Yeah, as far as my
Yeah.
first,
no,
I don't know.
I
I'd have to
can't think
fudge
of
an
one.
answer about like stacking my party in Final Fantasy to be a certain way. You know, someone's
Yeah, Final Fantasy,
Sabin's
that's
got the
true.
most hit points, and someone else has just got all the white magic and the materia and what have you. And
Yeah.
I know I just mixed games, like literally 3 games at once. Don't rake me for that. Thanks.
No, but I get what you're
Pokemon,
saying. Like
Leech Seed with
it
Bulbasaur.
it sort of had the Holy Trinity, even though like it didn't have threat management or real time combat of like the tank needs to do a thing. They still had characters that could do things like intercept attacks that had higher hit points, and they still had characters that did do the healing. It wasn't like the Holy Trinity so much as it was like you had a support and you had an attacker, and then you had some defensive attackers. Um, so now we've identified like turn-based JRPGs. Let's see. Can we think of any like Atari or Coleco games where you healed? Like,
What you're saying is not even like that you healed, but there was like a dedicated job of healing somebody else, healing an entity other, because you walk over pizza boxes in Ninja Turtles. I wouldn't call that healing. You are,
sure, but if you could
as a
pass
mechanic.
pizzas to other people as a character, and so I guess it's important to define that there's like a reliance there, then, right?
Yes,
Like,
reliance.
if you have a healer in your game, then you need to make sure there's enough unavoidable damage to make that healer relevant, or at least enough damage going around that healer is relevant. Otherwise, you don't need to have the healer. So it's just like sort of important to talk about what healing has become because of what games have evolved to. Like now that we don't need to have turn-based combat to have interesting combat, we can have like real-time stunning effects, and we can have multiplayer real-time stunning effects, and action-based games. So then another question becomes, so there's like the history of healing, and there's those foundations of healing as a reliance and as a tool to create cohesion between roles and like role-based gameplay. Can anyone think of a game that has innovated on healing? That maybe like either Holy Trinity or just there's like a, because I have one in mind, but it's, and it is it's Genshin Impact. Like they've taken like what a healer
Really?
or a tank should be. Yeah, I think it has kind of innovated on that because the context is that you're playing four characters at once. And the healers don't just like heal a hit point bar. Like there's Barbara who casts an ability, and then whoever you're maining will have this shield that will regen whenever they're not in combat, or sorry, when they're not attacking. You have to like run around a bunch to get your heal. And so you still have the reliance on the Barbara character, but Barbara doesn't, and she's supporting somebody else. Barbara doesn't need to do anything else other than put up that shield, or maybe do like her ultimate as a heal that heals everybody, even if they're not on the screen. But their tanks are really interesting too. Their tanks, because also you don't need to have four people out at once. The tank is more about adding mitigation to everybody else in Genshin Impact, which is almost like hearkening back to the Final Fantasy days of there's a character and they're just more defensive, but they're really like an offensive attacker.
They have cover when somebody gets low. They stub in and take a hit, things like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of where like, all those paradigms originated.
I've never really thought about like where it originated. I mean, I always thought it just originated from tabletop RPGs essentially, which went into MMOs, and then now it became a ubiquitous RPG thing. And I don't know, but I mean, I'm like you, Candace. I always play a healer in every game if it has a healer. If it has a healer, I'm picking the healer. I don't know why. I just really love healing. I actually think it's the most kind of cerebral out of the roles of in RPGs. It's the most sort of like
I would agree.
The one you're thinking of. It's triage is just a really great kind of mechanic. So much so I played so many hours of this like iPhone game called A Little Healer. I don't know if anyone played this game, but it's essentially kind of like I posted in live chatting. It's essentially just like a heal the bars mobile game. And it's I don't know. It's like it's so easy to kind of replicate the kind of healer gameplay. You could even just do it on this simple a phone game, right? Or just click the bars and click the heal to heal them. But I don't know. I just like support roles. I like healing. And I like all the different types of ways that you can all the styles of healing, right? I love HOTS, I love direct heals, I love AoE healing. I don't know. I'm a big fan, I guess. What other like healers in other games did you really enjoy? I know you said Genshin, Candace, but is there any others?
I mean, I wouldn't say I enjoyed the healer in Genshin. I'm just saying that it was kind of like it felt like at least like it was unique. Yeah. Because of it's more of like a tactical, I'm going to swap my characters. It almost felt more like Final Fantasy Tactics, right? It almost makes it into not a turn-based game, but you're thinking about how you would best use. It's more cerebral, I guess, than even the whack-a-mole style, like finding UI bars and then triaging UI bars. So, and then knowing exactly how all of those work, because it's almost like usually as a healer, you pump a heal into somebody else, and then that's the end of it. But then whenever it's you're responsible for how that heal is going to work. You're responsible for the outcome and like all the consequences of that heal. So I thought that was really cool. I think the healer that I like the most in any video game.
I think it's interesting too about, as you think about the Candace, another interesting thing to think about is like there's sort of been this like love-hate relationship with healers. Like a lot of games, a lot of players they want a healer, they want to play a healer role, but it can become kind of a nightmare for the system designers to design a game, especially combat, around a healer, because it could easily turn into people are trying to kill each other, and then this healer just keeps this guy up forever, and it doesn't feel like anything's happening. It just feels just like the bars aren't moving or whatever. Like a really great healer can just like make the game sort of, to use one of our friends Yano's terms painful, right? Like it's just
Fair.
like it could become painful to play against somebody who's just their HP bar never goes down, right? And so it's very delicate balance
Well, that
to
yeah, that's
to
interesting from like a PvP perspective. But do you feel, because I also, the healing class, it attracts certain personality types, but I certainly wouldn't say it attracts the majority of players. You know, I feel like DPS is just the most straightforward thing for people to grok, and they go to it. DPS roles in games, I think, have always been framed as kind of central in terms of like stepping into a role. They feel very kind of like self-contained, self-reliant. They're active. I think that, you know, like you said, there has to be a certain amount of damage. There have to be conditions that presuppose needing a healer, right? Whereas you can have every situation is going to need something to get killed, right? But not every single situation might need damage repaired, you know, if it's an easy fight or something else. And I was just kind of wondering, like, first off, if you feel like that's true. And then for me, I think a lot of the friction that comes from playing a healer class and why people might tend to avoid it, at least within the MMO genre, is just that it's like kind of the least diegetic of the play styles. That is, you're thinking the most, like Chris just said, he played the healer experience, you know, on an iPhone tapping bars. I think it like is kind of one of the more, it's just sort of not a very immersive experience in some ways, I find, because I'm having to look at elements the entire time. Whereas I have enough brain cycles freed up while tanking and DPSing to just keep more positional awareness. You know, as a healer, I feel like mostly I have to make sure that I'm not standing on fire or standing too close to people. You know, I can't really be watching monsters, watching play patterns, watching animations. Do you think that if healing were made more reactive in a style that, like, you know, forces you to take in the environment, it might be more attractive to people?
Well, here's an interesting thing about that is so when I was doing the monk healer, I wanted I had a few challenges for myself, which was one, I wanted people to not look at health bars and actually look at the environment, look at other players in real time. And so I was thinking about, well, maybe instead of targeting people and healing them, instead you attack creatures and and you heal nearby players in proximity, right? Every time you hit a creature nearby, somebody who's low health gets healed, or you just AoE heal and everybody around you is healed. So you have to kind of look at the health bars of people around you and move towards them. I wanted people to look at the battlefield rather than the UI, right? Like play the game, not the UI, which WoW has kind of turned into play the UI, not the game a lot of times, especially in raiding. But, you know, it didn't really work out so well because a lot of players are very accustomed to playing with the UI and actually like it. And I get it, right? Like I was saying, I was playing that mobile game where you just click the UI. I get that game and I understand why it's fun. But yeah, I think you could have a game with healers where it's more about looking at the environment, looking at the play field, not the UI. I actually think that's a really good, healthy goal to strive towards because, you know, playing the UI is sort of
right.
Not
It
really
depends
kind
on
of
what's
great game design, maybe, but
Yeah, it depends on the point of your game because, like, you're right. Like the battlefield design does feel very different, and probably that was a little bit jarring for World of Warcraft players who are used to the whack-a-mole UI. But there are ways like Overwatch supports that really well. Like you can see people's hit point bars through walls when you're Mercy, and you can, you know, like you'd have to imagine like what is the most AAA version of that experience and what would you need to enable that? Like you would need to be able to see hit point bars of people that are behind you. They would just like wrap around your screen, or like there's just a lot of stuff that WoW didn't have to support that vision. It's definitely still like a good vision. But I wanted to pose the question because you were talking about consequences and you were talking about how first of all, we talked about reliance on other players, and that was like the goal of the Holy Trinity. But we also wanted to talk about consequences and how it's like the healer always gets blamed, right? And because really, like when someone doesn't dodge an AoE attack or whenever they play poorly, the healer is the one that gets punished, right? Like as long as it doesn't one shot you, then all that does is punish the healers, right? So one of the things that like I would say like I even veered into for a long time in World of Warcraft, and it feels like World of Warcraft is steering into is like when you take something that should have been avoidable damage, instead of it just being damage, now there's going to be like a stun consequence, and like now you're going to lose DPS, or you get knocked back, and that's the new consequence. So that you also feel the consequence of your like bad behavior, and then not just like when you die suddenly you're like, what the fuck, healer? I guess my first question is like, what do you think about putting the consequence more on the person who fucked up than the healer, I guess?
I mean, I always thought that was sort of like a goal. It's just hard to do that, right? Like, and WoW, obviously, and you're familiar with this. It's just a lot of times what they did with like damage that you're supposed to move out of, they made it really, really deadly. So that was very obvious. Like, oh well, I stood in that thing and I shouldn't have stood in it, right? And a lot of times, it's almost you have to kill the player when that happens, because if you don't, if they go down to 10% health and then they die from like a minus mob or something that hit them, some rat or something, they're gonna die and then blame the healer still. And so um I think the challenge is trying to give feedback in a good way, elegant way, that they fucked up, not the healer. I always thought one way that the game could do this was this is very gamey, but some sort of way that you tally up avoidable damage versus unavoidable damage. And you need to give the player feedback. Hey, dude, you like all the 90% of the damage you took was avoidable
There are
damage,
mods that
and
do
that's
this.
why you wiped, right?
There's actually one
There
called
are mods, but it needs to
Elitism
be
Helper that is so spammy and annoying, but it basically every time
yeah.
people take avoidable damage, I mean, you've probably seen it. It will make you like the most hated person in the group.
Right. But you don't need that in Mythic play or in the highest tier play, because that'll just kill you. Like the game resorts to, the second you fuck up, it is instantly fatal, and so your raid only gets however many combat reses worth of fuck ups before it's game over. So like play better, right?
I mean, here's another idea, Luca, and this is right up your alley. Maybe different sounds when you die versus if you die from avoidable damage versus unavoidable damage, right?
Yeah,
I
the
don't
sound
know.
that you hear when you die to avoidable damage is "fuck you" from the healer, right? So we might as well just bake that into the game.
I think of
Yeah.
all of the in-game ways to encourage players to take more responsibility for their own actions and not just assume the healer will cover for them, and to discourage toxicity against healers. I think Candace's observation about stuns and stuff sounds like the smartest one to me so far. And I had never really ever thought that the purpose of adding such a mechanic onto something you're supposed to avoid is to basically force the DPS to lose DPS and look stupid and not have the death be the thing, because then you could shift the blame onto the healer. It's very plain.
Right, because then they won't be the top DPSer because they got stunned. The top DPSer will stay active the whole fight. And what's interesting is Final Fantasy and the LFR, they do something interesting too. Like two things usually. One, when you get hit by something in LFR, you take 50% more damage the next time you get hit by something. So like you really have to fuck up 3 times before you die. Like in realistically, or more sometimes. Like, but then there's also that shame of like you have the 4-stack debuff, meaning you got hit by 4 things you shouldn't have been hit by. But then also sometimes they'll just reduce your damage for taking they'll be like damage reduced 50% for fucking 45 seconds because you got hit by a thing you shouldn't have. And that way it's not fatal or anything. They don't have to worry about. But so then I wanted to wrap around that. So we're all like, yeah, like that's a really good idea. Like yeah, like put the responsibility back on the person who took the damage, and decrease toxicity and make that experience easier or better for the healer. But then you think about it and you go back to what we were talking about before, which was the purpose of healing is to create that interdependence between the players, and is to share that responsibility and to give that role, the onus to the healer. And so like if you think about it, then it's bad design, because like the healer has that's the role of the healer. They should be responsible for the hit points, right? Like
Yeah.
there should be that dependence. And so anything you do to take the responsibility away from the healer is taking away from that dependency you tried to create.
As as a healer, I got really annoyed with DKs when they were added to the game because their self-healing was so high. And they even had like, AoE healing or whatever, right? And it just felt like it encroached on my role so much, especially in like the meters. Like the meters will always be high healing because really healing is essentially basically their damage reduction effect. It's like essentially their block or their mit. And so really it's masquerading, it's healing, it's damage reduction or their tank mechanic masquerading as healing. It's not true healing. But the thing is, it still psychologically was annoying. And, I feel like healing should remain on the healer, right? And there'd be a lot of situations where it's like, I go to heal this guy. And what some of the most best moments when you're playing healer and most rewarding is when you're pre-casting a long cast heal and you're saving mana and efficiency. and you're doing it preemptively, which it takes skill to do, and you land it at the right opportune time and get 0 overhealing. Like that always feels really great. But then a lot of times where there's all this incidental healing coming out, different classes are popping their own healing spells, and the tank is healing people, whatever. You just don't have a lot of those opportunities where you can land that really rewarding heal, right?
Yeah, it's taking away from your identity and your role as the healer. Totally.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, I'm gonna keep simping this game, but like, I love healing in Final Fantasy 14 because for the longest time, I know they have the Sage now or something like that, but for the longest time they had two types of healers. They had the White Mage, which is like your basic B, like they have the hot, they have the big heal, and they have the small heal, and they have the AoE heal, and they are the heal. They're the White Mage. They do the White Mage casting. And then they had the Scholar, and the Scholar has a fairy, and the fairy will do most of your. The fairy is like was the only direct heal you had. You didn't have a direct heal as a Scholar. You had a fairy who would take that responsibility away from you. Eventually, you would be able to control the fairy. The fairy was like a pet or whatever, and then, but the tools in the toolkit of the Scholar is damage absorption. And so, kind of like Disc Priest, right? Like an amazing Disc Priest will be able to know who to shield before the damage comes. So, like, it's two different minds of healing. When you play a White Mage, it's reactive healing, and you're playing that quintessential whack-a-mole game. And as a Scholar, you need to watch the animations of the boss. Like, you need to see when Titan is about to slam down his foot, and right before he does that, you want to put the shield on everybody because the shield doesn't last a very long time, and it's very like mana costly. And so it was great because they were like, okay, we only have these two healers and they're very different and they have different play styles. Congratulations. I was like, damn, I love that. And then they were like, all right, we're going to put a third healer in the game. If you had to guess, or maybe you already know, what do you think the third healer did?
Made monsters.
I mean,
weaker?
the other type of.
I don't know.
Yep, that's a good one.
Well, I was just going to say the other options that you haven't said is like you DPS the heal or you do absorptions.
There you
Those
go.
are the other ones I could think of.
Yeah, like DPS to healing is really cool. The Scholar is known for its ability to DPS, considering they don't like spam heals all the time. But they don't heal to DPS. They DPS to get their mana back so they can heal. It's like indirect. But yeah, the other healer just does both. The other healer has a phase where they can say, I'm the White Mage healer, and I have the stance that makes me the White Mage healer, or I have a stance that makes me the Scholar healer, and I can be either one. But I'm not necessarily as good in either of those roles. I don't have as many tools in my toolkit for either of those roles. So it's like the hybrid. But then they're like, well, you can't just strictly make a class worse than another class. We learned that we learned the hybrid tax is bullshit in MMOs, and people won't play those classes. And so not only do they switch between roles, but like Lucas said, they have these like buffing and debuffing capabilities. And so they do that with a card. That's like a random card that you can pull. There's like a small skill to it, but mostly it's random. And then you decide who that buff. Imagine like a paladin buff back in classic WoW. You pull a card and you got the threat debuff, and you're like, oh, I can put a threat buff on, a threat debuff on the rogue to make sure the rogue can go crazy, or I can put a mana regen debuff on someone that's not me or something. That they're called an astrologian. They're pulling tarot cards out, and tarot cards do stuff.
I'm guessing they're
so
random.
I always thought,
do they come in like a sequence?
Think card master in League of Legends. If you're really good, you can tap the button just right. I think maybe it is just random. I can't remember. There was a skill to it. No, the skill didn't come from timing the card pull. The skill came from when you pulled a card, you could decide if you wanted to use it immediately or you could bank it, and you only had a 1-slot bank. So you knew, like, if you got the damage buff or something, and you knew that something was going to happen in the next 5 seconds, that like ads were going to come out, and it could really boost someone's damage if you just held that card for a little while.
This sounds like absolute challenge porn, basically. Like for the person who's mastered everything. Like, and by the way, let's open the floor up. If you want to come up, talk about your favorite healer experience, things you'd like to see more of in healing, just raise your hand and we'll get you up here. I think that
yeah.
I don't know why I held out on trying healing for as long as I did, because as you're pointing out with talking about this class, I think, and Chris mentioned with the triage, I think healing as a role benefits from the unlimited stupidity and chaos of players versus monsters, which are dumb, not maybe as dumb as players, but they're predictable. And what your group tends to do is not. And so I find healing to be this incredibly dynamic and challenging experience, maybe the most. I mean, PvP healers, I think, are probably the most talented World of Warcraft players that there are, because they're not only having to account for all of that, but they're also being actively targeted the entire time too. So, and I think that adding that extra predictive/random effect in there just sounds like I would need to take a nap after every single session. Like, that just sounds like so fucking much to handle.
Yeah,
The punchline that was really sad to the end of all that. Sorry, I kind of meandered there. The punchline is that eventually Final Fantasy decided that model didn't work, and that they couldn't just make a strictly worse healer because hybrid tax, even if it was made up for with a cool mechanic like buffing and debuffing. Eventually, the Astrologian had to be as capable as a white mage or as a scholar, and then the importance or the effect of the card drawing mechanic had to be nerfed because purity of purpose is it's a healer, right? So. Anyways,
that is a whole other interesting chapter, because at one point, Warhammer, when it came out, they had this whole philosophy with healers that they didn't want dedicated healers. So instead, they had like every class in game had like a heal spell, or there's like there's a number of classes that had healing, but it was like a diminished healing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had to like DPS, and then you would fill a bar, and then you could heal or whatever. But what was really interesting, because it was an interesting experiment, is people just min-max those classes to heal, so they became ghetto healer classes.
This is kind of what happened in Guild Wars too, I think.
Yeah, you can't stop it because it's a role people like to play, and you just can't so I don't know. I think just embrace it. Have healers so I could play your game. Anyways, we have Red Dawn up here. Red Dawn, did you have something you want to say?
Hey guys, I was wondering what your guys' thoughts on like sort of healer would use like it's sort of like Vladimir or something, like blood magic or whatever, where they would redistribute health or like sacrifice their own health to heal someone else, and like that sort of style of healing where they're essentially taking the health of others to give to someone else who is potentially dealing with a mechanic or whatever. You guys think that's something that's
interesting,
possible to be balanced,
like
or it's either going to be too broken or just too bad, like one or the other?
Like an active spirit link totem mechanic, basically. Like that's kind of the whole
I mean,
metaphor.
I think that could work for sure. I mean, the challenge with that sort of design is always going to be, how are you going to account for longevity, right? Can this healer class just basically just heal forever because it's just their health and their health regens? Like, mana is really kind of the thing for all the classes that keeps them in control and keeps them in line so that they can balance all the healers with each other, which that was also a challenge with, say, the monk, because the monk could like DPS and then heal. And so you can kind of just like heal longer than any other healer because, you weren't really spending as much mana as the other healers. And so it can become like a system design nightmare if depending on what the design is. But in terms of the fantasy, in terms of like, I have a lot of health and I share it with other people, and that's like the whole thing. No, I think that's cool. And I could fit like a lot of different archetypes, like you said, this like sort of blood healer.
I think it's a really cool premise, but I think you'd have to design your entire game paradigm around it. And here's why. Because I'm going to use Necromancers and EverQuest as an example. So they could do something similar. They could give their mana to other people. And mana is just a resource like health, right? And so their role, that's like a third role, a fourth role in the video game. There's like tanks, healers, DPSers, and CCers. And like that's what they had. Then there's this fourth role of people whose job it is to get mana and then give it to other people. And I feel like that's what you would have in your video game, of like people whose job it was to stay relatively safe or constantly heal themselves and just be like hit point bar farms to transfer hit points to another person. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that you'd have to design your whole game around it is because if you also have healers in that mix, then healers are strictly better than these HP transfer people, because like if you had no healers and you had HP transfer people, then the raid only lasts for as long as everybody has hit points, right? Like there's an attrition to the raid or to the multiplayer experience. But if you have someone who's generating more hit points, or if you have potions, or if you have regen or something like that, then eventually people can like gain more health. And so, but then when you have both of them present, that becomes really powerful as well. And so But then there's like a diminishing return on like HP transfer people versus HP generator people. So again, I think that would just make a new role in the video game of like HP generators and HP factories. And I'm not sure that being an HP generator, being that necromancer, felt really bad in EverQuest. And so it would be hard to make that role feel good. Low curtsy.
Druid, since you're also up on stage, you can go ahead, but I wanted to ask you about the controller role from D&D that you mentioned, because I have no idea what that is.
You could go ahead, because it kind of plays into what I'm about to kind of throw at you guys.
I just wanted to know what it was all about, yeah.
Well, I'll just explain it with an example with WoW. WoW's not a perfect example, but I would say vanilla WoW is about as close as it can get to this, which is the way that the raids are designed. They're designed in such a way that the Holy Trinity is kind of necessary, because you have these huge bosses that have huge health pools and they do big damage, and you have these long fights. They don't have that many ads most of the time, sometimes no ads, and it kind of just focuses everyone into like the DPS must be really good at casting and doing single target damage in one direction. The tank needs to be really good at taking damage from that one boss. The healer needs to be really good at healing that one guy, or whatever. But when you look at dungeons, especially in vanilla WoW, you look at the way that some of the players play, you could actually run into many of these dungeons missing a role. Like you could go in without a healer, you could go in without a tank. And in fact, it's sometimes more efficient to do things like that. Like sometimes you get like a 4 mage group with maybe a healer, maybe not even a healer, and you just AoE grind through the dungeon, and that's like the fastest way to get XP sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You're even seeing that now, actually, in TBC, because it's just most efficient due to the design of the dungeon. Like there's so many mobs spread around, they don't move very quickly. Many of them are melee, so they can't really take you out from range. So just due to the design, you're able to get away with some different gimmicks, or able to avoid using certain roles. And that really, to me, that's just like a prime example of the fact that you don't necessarily need to have classes designed in such a way that they have to fill the archetype of healer, DPS, or tank. It's just, that's how the content is designed. I don't know if you've ever done a gimmicky, weird thing like a shaman tank, or gone into a dungeon, like a low-level dungeon, maybe not with like a dedicated tank, or
sure.
Like, because there are many times when you don't, and this is where the controller thing comes in. Many times where you don't need to have a healer. Let's say like there's a pack of mobs, there's 5 mobs, or you're a 5-man group. You got 1 tank, let's say you got 3 single target DPS, and then you got a 4th dude who his job is actually just to kind of distract 3 of the dudes in that pack. Maybe he's not able to kill them, but he's able to distract them long enough that your other team members can take out the other 2 dudes. So like his whole job is to just like
a mez
control
kind
them.
of. Yeah.
Like he's just slowing them and keeping aggro, keeping them on him, but they're not really able to touch him or whatever, something like that.
Stuff a hunter
And I try to
would
give
do.
an example in chat. Yeah, hunter or like a frost mage. That's the example I could come up with based on WoW, because they can AoE freeze, they can AoE, they have blizzard, they have polymorph. They have so much control. And I really do just think it just comes down to the design. Like you're able to get away with doing a group like that in dungeons, certain dungeons. And that's just because those dungeons like make it possible due to their design. But raids, the way they're designed, it's just damn near impossible.
It's a factor of the difficulty of the monster. So if something is living for 8 minutes long, and you don't design a controller class who can like meaningfully mitigate that, right? So there's a world where like if you could CC bosses 20 seconds out of every minute, and the bosses did way too much damage, then the controller has this new role that they can fill. But it's also about dungeons are very numerous in monsters, and so like raids are, but typically a raid boss fight won't have as many ads as say an entire dungeon. So it becomes a question of how many monsters we're sending at you at once, and so you'd have to design the game such that we're sending too many monsters at you at once, and too many monsters is a tuning point, right? Like you could send 2 really really hard monsters at someone, and you would still need to CC 1, or you could throw 5 medium hard monsters, and like 2 of them are the hard point. and then you need to CC 3 of them or whatever. So you're right. The game has to be designed around throwing too many monsters and making that interesting agency over like when, where, and who you want to control. But controllers are totally a class that could exist in that do exist and could exist in MMOs, but you'd have to design your whole game around it.
I'm not even necessarily sure that they need to add a controller role or anything like that. I really do think, and someone mentioned in chat earlier too, the old shamans, the way that they were designed, they brought many supporting elements to the team, including healing, maybe not the most optimal healing, but they brought many supporting elements to the team and were still valued even in raids, even though they couldn't pull the top healing. And that's just because they brought so much other utility.
Sure.
And
So you're talking about like a support role that's not necessarily a healer, or you're talking about like a hybrid that could perform multiple roles, which downplays the net need of a role.
I think it goes even beyond just saying having a healer role or a support role or hybrid role. I think it just comes down to like the classes need to be very varied in design and have clear strengths and weaknesses, which they do the best, in my opinion, so far in vanilla. Like, the further you go into the future, it seems like that's weeded out. Because I don't necessarily think you have to have a healer role. You have to have a tank role, because you could need someone that's going to take most of the damage, or you wouldn't even have to worry about that if someone could make sure the damage wasn't taken in the first place. Or you bring a druid to the group, they're not the most efficient tank, but I
think it's
totally. But the Holy Trinity was a decision, a conscious decision that World of Warcraft made to create that reliance, and so they created those. Yes. They designed those classes and created those balances. We're not saying that the Holy Trinity has to exist in every game. That the first thing we talked about was like whether or not a game even has a Holy Trinity. Like BDO is an MMO that doesn't have a Holy Trinity, and it works just fine. And it works the way you described, where people are responsible for the damage they take, and there are people who can debuff. Yeah, you should play BDO. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, like what you're saying, there's like two, I mean, whether it quote unquote needs it, there's two, whether you're saying does the game need to have healers for it to be fun is one question, or does you really need a healer to do the content with the difficulty that it has, right? Which is always like a lot of dungeons, as you get better gear, or if you're really, really skilled, you don't need to bring a healer, right? Like there's been always like those groups
that's
who do.
That's a tuning question, though.
It is.
That's all just tuning.
It is. But like Candace said, the vision of the game was to have a Trinity, and so that's why it does have it. And sometimes now and then it ebbs and flows of like, oh, the healer just feels like useless, or doesn't feel like that impactful, or it doesn't feel fulfilling to play. And that's always a challenge for the team to work on and to.
Which harkens back to what Druid was saying about how vanilla was so satisfying, is because those roles, there was still like the need for those roles, right? And WoW decided that if you're not a warrior tank, then you're not a raid tank. But you can be a dungeon tank if you're a paladin or a druid or a shaman, and that felt really good, and that was okay because it was like clearly defined, and that not everyone was so hyper specialized into their role. So the game felt a bit bigger, right? Because you felt like hybrids could do something meaningful, and that you could spec into something that was non-standard or not just pure tank, pure DPS, pure healer. You could feel like you were making it your own, that the game felt like you had more agency and it was like a bigger game. I completely agree, actually.
By the way, one little tidbit there too is that, a part of what's diminished healing as a role in the modern game versus say classic, as Druid was saying, is just like what we're talking about earlier, where so many other classes have healing spells, tanks have heals, etc. And a lot of that was added because to make the level up game, I don't want to say easier, but let's say less painful for some people, just so that you smoother, more accessible, let's say. And then also just for it to give every class and every kind of player in a raid environment or dungeon some sort of way they could heal themselves or have some sort of agency or whatever. Like downtime is seen as like, drudgery, right? But it's a slippery slope. Once you start adding all these self-healing things or mitigation mechanics on every class is a shield wall, whatever it is. Well, now suddenly the healer isn't that important, right? And then you have to pressure the healer, pressure the players even more in a dungeon to compensate. and then it becomes stressful or it becomes unfun. And so yeah, it's very complicated. It all
Interesting.
interweaves together.
Cool
Anyways,
idea.
let's
Yeah.
who's next?
Let's do QK.
Hey there. I heard Candace talk a lot about Astrologen and FFF14, and I just wanted to say that that class is the class that made me a healer main. I absolutely love it. But one of the healer problems that I've seen people in the game in 14 argue about is whether healing is too easy or too hard, because it seems as though a lot of the encounters are designed to where the players will complain it's too easy or too hard. And I think one of the reasonings they said is that when new players start to play healing, it can be very overwhelming. And in that game, what happens is that the healers tend to be more of the breaking point, even more so than the tanks, which is unlike WoW. So they
Yeah.
want to make things easy enough to where like a new player can play like a white mage and then they could heal new content and be okay and have a good experience and not be the breaking point that everybody gets mad at. But at the same time, you get into like more difficult stuff that you want people to slowly creep into if they want to. And then people say, well, that's not hard enough. There's not enough damage going out. We want, you have all these healing tools. You want to use all of your healing tools. You want to feel like you're helping out your team or you're helping save the run, for example. What do you guys think about that? Have you guys ever thought about something like that before? And how would you think about balancing it?
Yeah, very fascinating. And I love that the thing that drew you to healing was the very high skill healer that took a lot of thinking, says a lot about you as a player. That's really cool. So yeah, what I'm hearing from you is you're asking basically have you ever dealt with a problem where skill becomes both actually skill becomes a limiting factor in how difficult you can tune the raids, and by skill we mean the skill of the healer, and two, because part of that is when you have a role who is really good at preempting damage, like the scholar or even the astrologian, that's make or break, right? Like the max hit points of the raid goes from, let's just say 1,000 to now 2,000. And so everything is less lethal because sometimes someone has been able to intuit the damage. But if you don't have scholars, or if you don't have a scholar who knows the fight, then you won't have that damage mitigation. And then the raid only has the 1,000 hit points that have to be reactively healed. So I guess what you're asking us is if we've ever had to tune a class or an encounter around the skill gap between players?
Yeah, so it seems like it's almost as if they make things too easy for the new healer players, right? So they don't believe that new healers can, or maybe they just don't want them to have bad experiences when they're starting out healing, because for the most part, with a lot of the new stuff, like if you wipe it, a lot of it can depend on the healer, right? Because if you're not healing the damage, people will eventually die.
Right.
But at the same time, it feels as if, but if you do know what you're doing, if you know how to press which buttons at what time, then it can be incredibly boring, because then all of a sudden, it's a little bit too easy. And they sort of, I think they take, I could be wrong here, but it seems like, for example, the introduction savage fights tend to be much easier to heal because they want people to dip their toes in if they want to be able to do that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want people to have more success so that they can gain power and overheal it, and outgear it eventually, even if it's too hard for them whenever they first play. Something interesting about how the World of Warcraft audience kind of self-polices this. So it feels like the bosses will just do an insane amount of damage in Mythic, right? But if they don't do enough damage, and what I mean by that is if a balanced raid comp is supposed to have 6 healers and 4 tanks and whatever 15 DPS or whatever your comp is, World of Warcraft mitigates that by saying, because there's a larger raid size in WoW. For reference, for people who don't know, Final Fantasy has a max raid size of 8, and you often can't launch an instance unless you have 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 4 DPS. You can do custom stuff like Mythic and stuff with whatever comp you want, but that they kind of balance it around that. And the difference is you can drop from 6 healers to 5 healers, and that's not a giant differential in the power of your raid or the healing capability of your raid. But if you drop from 2 healers to 1 healer, that's massive, right? So if you try to bring fewer healers to a Final Fantasy raid, good fucking luck, right? Whereas like you can bring fewer healers. That's why you see like mythic fights in World of Warcraft, people will bring 2 healers because there wasn't enough healing to do for 6 healers. So we might as well try to kill the boss, right? The best defense is a good offense. And WoW kind of like beautifully self-polices itself in that way. And it's kind of like less intentional than us like deciding that some fights are harder than other fights. It's just sort of like in general, monsters in WoW raids will get harder the further into a dungeon they are, so that people can, gear up, get success as and move forward. But yeah, Final Fantasy is really strange because they have that problem of it's either 2 healers or it's 1 healer, and that's hard.
Right, and it
Yeah.
seems, sorry, yeah, I
No,
was,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, it seems that the only time where you're using your healing toolkit to its absolute max potential is in the hardest ultimate fights, and that's it, unfortunately.
For sure. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't
Yeah.
have much of an incentive to push those buttons.
Right. So basically, kind of what Candace is saying, essentially, the more skilled the healer, the less the raid or group has to rely on having multiple healers and can focus on damage and efficiency. And, that's kind of the payout that a really great healer has for a raid.
But no
So,
matter
yeah.
how good of a healer you are in Final Fantasy, you're probably not going to be 100% better than the next white mage, which means that you can't drop healers, like you can be
Oh, yeah,
20%
no.
better than another healer in WoW pretty easily, right? And then if you're
Mhm.
20% better, then that's almost like you should just drop a healer, because one healer is 1/15 of your healing, or sorry, is 15% of your healing.
Yeah, there is solo healing, but it's very, very rare, and you have to plan with your entire team in advance, and it's just not something
Well, I
you
think
see.
I think this is another good sort of point, is that, I only think we've scratched the surface for really great content for healers. There's, yes, you heal a raid, you heal a party, but is there more experiences healers could do, to challenge them or do special things for them? I think there's way more opportunities of content and systems for that, that we haven't yet seen.
Hey,
Yeah.
this actually segues exactly into what I wanted to ask about, and that was in Final Fantasy XIV, I played a white mage for a long time and then quit for like 3 or 4 years and came back and learned in modern Final Fantasy XIV, like 50% of my expected job role is now to do DPS.
Oh, as a
And that-
scholar?
as a white mage.
Oh, as a white mage. Interesting.
Like, yeah, and it's just like every group I was in, they're like, you need to be doing damage, especially after they took away the I don't remember what's called, but the form switching, whatever. But that's actually what I was gonna bring up, is like, do you consider that a failure of the design of the encounters, or because I didn't really want to do DPS as a healer. Like, I played a white mage because I wanted to feel smart and precise with my heals and stuff like that. So I was
Sure.
just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, you're talking about the white mages used to have battle stance that would reduce your healing but increase your damage output.
Right. And eventually, once they got rid of that, it became basically an expectation for white mages specifically. I don't know about other healers, but that, the goal is to have 0 down cycles. So every second you're not healing, you now have to be doing DPS.
I think secretly that's always been a thing for healers. Like, and I think actually the expectation that you can, as a healer, I should not have to do anything but heal is it means that the class has not properly introduced you to this game, I think, or that suddenly your expectations are different. And I think that's the real problem, is like when you're leveling up, you expected that you had to do damage, right? Someone wasn't going to just do 100% of the damage for you. But then when you went to raids, you fought easy enough stuff, like QK was saying, that like it wasn't very pressing for healers to do damage, because you could still have very reasonable success without the healers doing damage. But secretly, like, you could have been doing damage the whole time to make it go faster and to give everyone a better experience. But there was no expectation, there was no reliance on that. But then as a game matures and as the players of the game become more skilled, the game creeps up in difficulty at the higher end, right? Like you saw the raid bosses Memoron back in Wrath of the Lich King. It took 200 attempts to beat, and people are like, that's the hardest boss we've ever heard of. And then fucking Ragnaros was like 300 attempts to beat and like doubled it. And it's like, now this is the hardest boss. It takes 300 attempts. And now like the mythic boss is like 400 plus attempts to beat. So like they're trying to keep up with the skill of the players as the skill of the players keeps going up and as the conveniences that players have keep going up. But if you look back at like classic WoW, bosses like did an AoE sometimes, or they like cursed the raid sometimes, but mostly they just like DPS'd the main tank. And that was enough. So there's this joke that like once you make an end boss mechanic in WoW, that like it'll only be 1 or 2 expansions before that end boss mechanic ends up in a dungeon somewhere because of the the skill creep of players. And so so anyways, long story short, I think that it's wrong for players to have an expectation that they should only be able to heal. And if there is a way that games could alleviate that, that would be cool. But I agree that it is certainly jarring once you get to a point where it is now expected for you to heal, or else the group won't have success.
Yeah, I mean, I would give, I might just sort of disagree with Candace here a little bit. I mean, it depends on the game. It depends on what it is. But, I do sometimes get miffed sometimes where it's just like, I'll join a group and it's like, just DPS, healing here is easy. And just like, God damn it. Like, I don't really like DPSing that much, especially, if I'm playing a monk, I don't really like melee DPS as much as ranged DPS. And so, and I noticed the same situation with like, priests who play the group asks them to switch to shadow and they're like, they don't want to do that because they want to play a certain type of role. And and so usually I don't know if it's like really a failure of the developer or of the content. It really depends on what their goals are. If it was never their goal that a healer switches to DPS at any given moment or on a certain boss fight or something, then probably it is a failure. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm just kind of giving the opposite thought of, or the a different thought of just like I do kind of prefer playing pure healer, and I think what you're kind of going here for, Candace, is just that it's gonna be a challenging end game experience if all you really like doing is healing, because you won't really be able to engage in the solo content. And if the class just feels like a shit DPSer, like really, really bad, like unfun, like you're just like, there's points in WoW Classic where as a healer, it was better to wand than to actually use smite or any of your DPS abilities, right? Like that's not a good design. And so I'm not saying that a healer class should have bad design for DPSing, but when you are in a group situation, you're always going to go to more of what your special role is, right? Whether it's tanking or healing or buffing or DPSing, whatever it is. And that's a fair expectation. But
yeah, I guess to me the problem is the lull in the middle where you don't feel the need to contribute anymore to the DPS. But I mean, and it's not to say that like it's a laziness thing or it's like a check in, check out. It's just as fun to play a fight where you are literally mashing heals the whole time. And that is also in spirit the same thing as like the healer who just wants to heal, but also there isn't damage happening all the time, right? And both of those playstyles are like okay. The question is, once the content gets difficult enough, those expectations change.
Yeah.
And so even the healers that are like mashing heals 24/7 in mythic raids are expected to do some damage. Like that's the difference between the top guilds and like the top 5% guilds, is you'll see each healer is doing 20% of the DPS of the DPSers.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing to think about too is maybe I'm kind of a freak, but I actually did like it in Classic when you kind of had lulls and you just stood there at regen. And
no,
just
totally.
were, like, looking at bars and there's healing rotations. It's like, okay, you guys chill out and med your mana or whatever. I kind of like that. But some players hate it.
That in Final Fantasy 9 or 11,
right.
11. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Cancel. You're saying the other show where it's like you read the book or whatever, your whole UI turns to the book. It's like that kind of pacing I kind of like, but I can understand why players hate it, because it's just like they want, the zoomer mentality. I need to hit a button every millisecond, otherwise I'm fucking falling asleep.
Well, and again, like I'm just gonna fall back to the expectations that the game sets. And I think that's why people feel betrayed by it. Like suddenly they feel betrayed because they have to do DPS because for a long time they didn't have to, right? Whereas like in EverQuest, you are so mana limited, and when you want to regen mana, you have to look at a book. You can't do anything else. So the expectation isn't that you're going to do anything but sit and look at your fucking book. And like peaks and valleys
Yeah.
of intensity are good. Like that's what makes for a satisfying encounter. It's like you can't have the peaks without the valleys, right? Like the highs don't feel as high without the lows to compare it to. But again, that game did a very good job of setting expectations for the player. You can do one thing at a time. You can either heal, you can either DPS, or you can get your mana back. And the best way to heal is to heal and then get your mana back. But like in WoW, that expectation was never set. The expectation is that you should be doing damage.
Okay, cool. Well, great question, CJ. Let's move on to Glaive.
Hey.
Hey.
So someone earlier actually brought up something that I wanted to add to. When a healer just kind of lets you die, even if you like you kind of die to like a room wipe or something. But one of the most infuriating things in 14 healing is when like half the party dies to like a room wipe or something. They res you up, and then they don't heal you, and they go right to resing the next person, so you die to the next room wipe.
Oh yeah, it's real frustrating. Yeah, Final Fantasy does this thing. For context, when you res somebody, they actually get a momentary immunity to damage. So if you res them in like a puddle, or if you res them to whatever, and so that gives healers like just enough of a mental break that they'll be like, okay, I can start resing somebody else. But also the shittiest part about it is when you're immune to damage, you're also immune to healing. So like you don't want to immediately land a heal on someone that you resed because it will just get absorbed by this momentary immunity. But yeah, that's really funny. Like, and then because the mechanics of the game, when you resurrect, you only resurrect with like 10% of your life or something like that. You're relying on this heal as the DPSer, but the healer's also like, I don't know if I should heal you yet. Maybe I should res somebody else, and it's like just enough of a break that this kind of shit happens all the time.
What I lovingly call the resing circle jerk. Because like because it ends up this infinite loop of everyone trying to res each other and then dying.
Yeah.
But okay.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think every.
Well,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, but also going back to design, I think 14 does kind of show you at least a little, like, I wouldn't say it was part of AR's design, but it certainly was in Heavensward design, because at that point, every single healer at least had a dot. And like the whole thing with your healing DPS then was like keeping up the dot. But now with Shadowbringers and all that stuff, they've given you like a full-on burst attack every now and again. Like with White Mage specifically, there's like this Lily gauge that fills up, and like once it fills up, you can do like this 800 like potency like super explosion on things, pretty much.
Yeah.
And like I think people would be fine so long as that kept popping too.
Yeah, and that just goes back to reinforce my point of setting the expectation. And if the whole time that you're raiding, even when the content is easy, if it's expected that you can blow 4 lilies on an explosion when there's no raid damage, that's fine. It's just when suddenly you do the hard stuff and now you have to start using lilies for that is when people start feeling betrayed by the game. But that's a really powerful tool though to like normalize doing some damage. Like they make it really easy, they make it really accessible, and they only make you check in on it every like 20 seconds or so when your lilies fill up. It's a really good tool.
Yeah, because like when it's full, you get the red lily, and then you go boom.
You get the big old lily. You don't just get the buds, girl. You get that lily.
Yeah,
that's something that I really like seeing healers now that you didn't see in the past, which is sort of like, I don't want to say rotational, but sort of rotational. Of like you prime people, or you build up a resource and then you consume it, and there's sort of like a cadence and a flow. Like I really like that.
So would that be more acceptable to you, Chris, as the person who likes to just heal and doesn't want to do DPS? But if you had a priest that had 4 buttons, and one was a hot, and one was a heal, and one was a shield, right? And those were your 3 tools that you could use in your toolkit. But also every 75 seconds, you had a button that would deal a shit ton of damage. Would you hit that button?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. Would you feel good? Would you feel good about hitting that button?
Wait, sorry, say that again, Candace.
Would you feel good about hitting that button?
I think so. I don't mind like healing and then turning that damage or vice versa. That's totally fine.
So then,
I
it
guess
just becomes a question of, like, again, setting the expectation. So if you had always had something that accessible, something easy, you wouldn't have felt bad about doing damage. What feels bad about doing damage as a healer in WoW is, like, one, the effort that it takes, two, the fact that often it's going to take mana as well. So it's like a mental burden of, should I spend mana on healing? Should I save it? Or should I do damage with my mana, or should I save it for healing? And three, just the number of cycles, because the GCD is only 1.5 seconds, like, the frequency with which you have to do it is part of it.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree with that. Okay, cool.
Let's get just mutes in here. They've been waiting for a super duper long time, and then we will close it out. What's going on?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I started healing in TBC with a Holy Paladin, and ever since I've probably healed in every single MMO I've ever played, which is I think like Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy 14, but not as much seriously in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like over time I've noticed a trend where the kits of the healers seem to get, I guess, what I would call more homogenized. Like I started with a very limited toolkit on a Holy Paladin, right? I had 2 single target spells that were super efficient. And I noticed over time that I slowly started getting more and more that kind of, I guess, removed that identity from it and just kind of not really turned me into the other healers, but just made me more similar. And every time I try new games, it seems like every healer I play also seems to just have spells for most situations. As designers, do you guys feel a lot of pressure to create healers like that? Or like, I don't know. It's just been strange for me to see it happen. I don't know that I like it too much.
Great question for Chris.
So just to be clear, the challenge of designing healers where they have a button literally for everything, you're saying?
Yeah, like I started as a Holy Pally, right? Now we have Flash of Light and
Mm.
Holy Light. And Holy Shock on a really long cooldown. It wasn't very good. And then over time I got Beacon, which was, I thought, like a really great way to extend the kit, but not make it just like a priest and druid, which they could just press a spell like Prayer of Healing. But then over time, I noticed like the Holy Pally got Light of Dawn and stuff like that, which was just
Light of
AoE
Dawn's
healing.
Right.
it's an AoE heal. They got
Yeah.
a hot that, so suddenly
Yeah.
everybody has all of the tools in the toolkit. Why do you think that happens, Chris?
Well, the reason why that happened was because, back in the day when 40-man raids, there was kind of like really sub roles of healers, right? There's the tank healer, there's the raid healer, and then there was gradations between that. And then of course, like in Lich King and whatnot, the Disc Priest kind of turned into like almost another sub healer where they're more about preventing damage, like they're kind of a buffer, really just with absorptions. And that's all great, and that actually feels really great to the player because that feel like they have a specific role that they're doing. It feels cool to be the tank healer, and it kind of had like almost a fantasy thing with paladins and warriors. So it was a cool pairing. But the challenge with that was once the game moved into 10-man raids, you could pair like maybe a tank healer, but then you'd need like a raid healer, right? And then it became like kind of a weird thing where it's like, well, why can't the paladin, support the raid? Like more and more healing in the game became more and more about AoE healing than single target. Like pretty much all raid healing now is essentially all AoE healing. Like not many people just kind of hit holy lights on people and kind of like that game I was showing earlier on iOS, like the Trinity sort of hit precasting and using different like speeds of heals with different efficiencies isn't really a big picture in the game really that much in raids with healing. It's more just kind of using your AoE heals and moving out of the mechanics and stuff. And so that's kind of why the healers have just kind of became more homogenized over time. Do I think it's a good thing? My personal opinion is no. I kind of like where there's like sort of strengths and weaknesses among the healers, and there's. It's not to say that there aren't.
Yeah,
you
there
know, of
still
course,
totally
Druids
are.
kind of. Yeah. They're still hots and stuff, and there are some strengths and weaknesses, but they are kind of more. They're not as let's say steep as they used to be.
I like that perspective from class design, from an encounter design perspective, as someone who made bosses for a very long time. I think what you're describing is also, so it's a product of what Chris was saying on the class design side, but it's also a product of complexities in encounter design, right? So if you have healers that are subdivided into roles like damage prevention or single target healing bomb or small AoE heals more frequently or a heal that bounces to 3 targets but does less each time, or the hot healer who isn't good at is good at sustained healing but is not good at burst healing, right? That's 5 different roles of heal style that you have to support. And then there's this fallacy, I think, in encounter design where people think that you have to keep every role happy at all times in every fight. So it becomes really taxing for the encounter designer to make enough mechanics that are happening at once that makes the single target bomb healer feel good. But then also, by contrast, the hot healer, who doesn't do well unless everyone's at low hit points for a long time. And there's a lot of people at low hit points for a long time. But then even then, the fucking guy that throws out little Light of Dawn heals that are big, small heals, but in a huge AoE, you bring 4 or 5 of those paladins, they all blasted at once. Guess what? Everyone's at full health now. So it's just a complexity in encounter design that makes it really hard to cater to all of those micro roles. And so instead, the class designers are like, well, fuck that. We'll just give everyone everything, because sometimes a paladin feels bad because they can't heal, or sometimes a druid feels bad because the raid's not low enough all the time. And so
it's really
I think
a hard problem.
But then my personal opinion, and then I'll sit off of my fucking soapbox, is I don't think every fight needs to test every skill all the time. But I do think if you have a raid tier, that's the beauty of the tier, is you can have the fights where druids are really good, and you can have the fights where paladins are really good, and that can feel really good. But then also, then you have the problem where people feel like they need to have 100 alts. So we need druids for this fight, and then we need paladins for this fight, and then we need shamans for this fight. And so you look back to that player experience, and the player's experience is, if I'm going to play a healer, in order to most optimally do it, I need to play 5 healers and keep that up. So then it's just this chicken and egg cycle where we just say, fuck it, everyone's going to have everything. And it's a really sad world.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate the insight.
Of course.
Yeah, I just got some tweet about, just from Night Stalker, actually, just a bunch of other topics he wanted to hear on healing, about hybrid specs and down ranking and endless mana scenario and what to do about that. Just again, with every week's topic, I feel like there's just so much to chew on with this, and so it'd be good to have a round 2 with KJ at some point.
Yeah,
with this,
we'll get him back in here. He's by the way, we didn't even address that. He's just out for a couple of weeks, and hopefully we see him back.
He's traveling.
He's traveling.
What do they call this? The hot girl summer.
You guys,
he's out there. Summer.
Y'all are gonna get to see him though. We want some Discord pics if y'all eating some taco time or something.
Yeah, and this was a really good episode with Candace too. I feel like.
Yeah.
A lot of these episodes, I'm like, wow, imagine not having Candace on your MMO team. What are you gonna do?
You'd be screwed.
Oh, heart.
Well, with that, I think we should probably close it out. This has been a whopper of an ep. Thank you so much for all the awesome questions. It's clear that there's more to say about healing, and maybe we'll get back to it someday. I'm guessing we will. So tune in same time next week, or hang around the Discord and chat. And Chris, what's our closing tagline?
Oh, later, gamers.
All righty.
Thanks, everybody. Later, gamers.
Later, gamers.